Hello, everyone. My name is Damian. I'm a developer on UIElements, and today I'm going to be talking about building UI for games for runtime using the new UI Builder. Now, UI Builder is a visual authoring tool that builds UI using UIElements. So before we begin with UI Builder, I just want to give a brief overview of UIElements so we're on the same page. So UIElements is a new, although not so new anymore, API for Unity for creating UI. Its goal is to create a unified way for designing and creating UI for Unity for both the editor and for runtime. Now, there existed and still exist two other APIs for creating UI for Unity. We have I'mGUI, which is primarily used in the editor, and it's C# based, and it's immediate mode. And we have UGUI, which is used for runtime, and it's game object based, so it lives in the scene. Now, these two APIs have served us and you well over the years. Obviously, most of the content created with Unity and most of Unity itself is still built using these two APIs. But their drawbacks have become harder and harder to fix within their frameworks. So that's what pushed us to build UIElements. Those drawbacks are around performance, scalability issues, and the fact that as a new user to Unity, you need to learn a lot about Unity itself and how it works before you can start building UI. So it's good to have some goals on when you start building a new API. These were our goals. We wanted to create an API that was a framework that was easy to collaborate on, especially between designers and developers. We wanted to make it easy to reuse parts of it elsewhere in your project or in other projects. We wanted to reduce iteration speeds significantly, make it easy to extend existing controls and widgets to your liking. This was big, familiarity, so we wanted to leverage knowledge outside of the Unity ecosystem to build something that is familiar to both Unity veterans and new users to Unity. And finally, we want to make something performant. It's a big one. We want your UI to not stand in the way of your actual game, right? Like I said, the UI Builder is a visual authoring tool, which means we won't be looking at a lot of code today, but I wanted to spend just one slide on the UIElements API itself so that we have some idea of what we're abstracting. So UIElements is split in sort of three main parts. We have the style sheet, so this defines your styles. It is called USS. It is an asset. It's very similar to CSS. In fact, it's a standard CSS subset of CSS. It works very simply. You have these rules. So you have a selector, which is like a search query for elements, so it looks for elements that match. And then you have in the brackets a list of properties that you want to change. So in this case, we're looking for all the elements that have this container class on them with this dot. It's like a tag. We're assigning font size. And then we're looking for this one, for text blue, we're looking for a specific element that's called random explosion. We'll see where that comes in later. Next part, we have the XML. So this is the definition for your hierarchy of elements. This is also a separate asset. So it's XML-based. Each tag, except for the root one, is an element. So you're creating these elements, and you're nesting them together as a parent-child relationship. So the first element I create here is a visual element. This happens to also be the base class for all the elements in UIElements. It's what you extend to build custom ones. And I give it a class container so that I get the font size 40 from the style sheet. Then we are actually assigning the style sheet to this element, and it will apply to all the children as well, so by path. And then I create one child label with the name random explosion. And of course, the text that you see in the end result. And then finally, we have the C# API itself. This is where all the logic happens. In this case, we're building an editor window in the editor, so we implement the onEnable function. We start by loading the XML asset. So this will also pull in the style sheet because it's referenced. And on this asset, we call clone tree, which will actually go through each tag and just call new on that element with the correct parameters. So it just builds the same hierarchy, but in C# object land. And we get back the root of this tree. So with this root, we can use the query system that comes with UIElements to find our label within the tree using the name, random explosion. And then once we have a reference to it, we can assign some functionality to it. So we can say, we can register for a callback on mouse up event. So this is completely useless, but you can let go of the mouse on this label, and this action will run. This action itself is also pretty useless, but it fits on the slide. All I do is I just eat the event. I just stop the propagation. Nobody else up the tree can have my event. It's mine. But you can imagine putting anything you want here. It's just a way to hook it up. And then finally, I add the root of the tree that I got from XML to the root of the editor window, which is part of all the editor windows. And this is how it gets added to the render queue and starts rendering and starts being displayed. And all of this, except for my onEnable, is exactly the same for runtime. Okay, let's go on with the demo. Quick shout out to Michael Dearnay, I hope I said it right, for creating the image assets for this demo, because otherwise you would have been staring at a bunch of boxes that I made. Press play. So we have the hyper-familiar tanks project, but we added some UI to it. So we added a main menu, press start. We have some questionable UI here that was probably made by the developer just to get the functionality working, so I can move my tank. As I fire, the number of shots goes up, so that's linked. This is a list of all the other players with the health bars being linked in. If I damage myself, yeah. There we go. And I can increase my speed, so you see the speed going up. I can cause random explosions. And I can go back to the main menu. If I cause enough explosions, we also have an end screen that gets us back to the, so, small little game. Okay, now obviously we have a goal for today, which is to get rid of that horrendous UI and build proper UI for the game. And we're gonna use the UI builder to do this. So the UI builder is a package. It's available in the package manager. Once you install it, you get this big monolithic editor window. At least for now, will be a monolithic editor window. So it's split into these parts that you can drag around. So we have up here the Explorer. The Explorer is very similar to the hierarchy in Unity, but it only applies to the UI document you're editing. And it's split in two. So at the top, we have a list of all the selectors from the style sheet. So these are also using class names, so the dot. And we can click on one and inspect its styles, so using also a dedicated inspector. These are all the supported USS properties with some UX, of course. Down here, we have the actual hierarchy that's coming from the XML. So as I'm hovering over these two buttons, you can see they're right here. Oh, by the way, if I hover over the style sheet selectors, you can also see which elements they're applying to in the canvas. Down here, we have the library, which is similar to the project window, but again, it's split in two. So we have, up here, we have a list of standard controls that come with Unity. Don't worry about that. Standard controls that come with Unity, so things like button, scroller, toggle, etc., and the very useful vanilla visual element, which we'll use a lot today. And down here we have the project section, which is a list of all the XML files you have in your project, so you can use these. You can obviously open them for editing, but you can also use them just like any other control in the current document, sort of like nested prefabs. In the middle, we have the canvas. So this is edit time only, authoring only canvas. So what I'm resizing here is not an actual element that exists in the XML document. It's just for quickly previewing how your UI will react within different contexts. And of course, I can click on an element here to see its inspector. So this is now inspecting a single element. So up here we have all the attributes that are in the XML things like name and, in the case of a text, a label, the text itself. In the middle, we have the style sheet section. This is where you can add or remove class names, classes. And down here, we have the sort of a similar view, well, the same view that we had for the style sheet selectors, but these are controlling inline styles. That is, styles that are stored in the XML, and they only apply to this one element. Okay, so let's start building some UI. Just going to open rough game UI screen. Somebody did extra work to make this look ugly, I think. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to start fresh. That's not really salvageable. So we have a blank canvas, scary blank canvas. Let's add a button, make it less scary. Size the button. Okay, gotta save that. Silence. So UI Builder right now operates on a pair of UXML and USS. This restriction will be lifted in later versions. Okay, we save that to disk, and now what we can do is change the UI that we're using in the game. So the way UIElements works at runtime is similar to canvases with UGUI, but we call it a panel. So we have a panel renderer component on just an empty game object, and this guy will start rendering your UI to screen. It works very similar to the editor window in that it has a root element. So with this root element, you can attach any visual elements you create yourself in C# or clone tree that we had in the example. But you can also, in the inspector, assign a UXML asset that will be used to pre-populate this root. So let's change this guy to our new one. And if we go to play mode, we have a button. Okay, now we can continue working without going back out of play mode because it's nice to see a preview of what it looks like. And we don't have to worry about losing any changes because we are operating on a completely separate asset. It's nothing to do with the scene. So when I come out of play mode, I'm not going to lose anything. Okay. One thing I want to fix is the fact that this is still using the editor theme, the editor dark theme. So in the builder, you can sort of pretend you're in the light skin. If you're building editor extensions, you've probably gone through this. You have to switch the entire editor to light skin, just check it, or vice versa. So you can do this just for the canvas, much faster. But also, we have a runtime theme, which will expand over time. Right now, it's pretty basic, but at least now we have sort of one-to-one. Okay, now I do have a mock-up that I was given of what we want to build. So if I click on this hierarchy item here, I select the canvas controls. So again, this is for authoring time only. It doesn't change the document. So I can give it a background color, an image, or if I don't have an image and I just want some context to my UI, I can use just the live camera feed from a camera. So this is just showing the camera. It's not meant to replace the game screen in any way, but it might save you from having to go into play mode each time you want to see, what the sand look like behind your UI. Okay, going back to this, I do have an image. And it also is my cheat sheet. So that's what we want to build today. We have those 3 buttons that we had, super ugly, as now with icons and sort of in the middle, stuck to the left of the, anchored to the left of the screen. The stats that we had, just pure labels, are now in this nice box. And we have the player list anchored to the bottom right. Now, let me just reduce the opacity a little bit because it's kind of confusing. Okay, so just want to briefly talk about anchoring. It's a pretty important feature. So UIElements, let me just add a prop here, comes by default, it will apply Flexbox-based layouting. It's an automatic layouting system, similar to how you would use it on the web. And you can see here my button is, by default, will take up space and it pushes down the visual element down here. So you can sort of say no thanks if you want, and switch the button to absolute mode, and now I can move the button anywhere I want. I can size it, do this, and it's by default sort of anchored to the left and the top. So we can change this to say anchor it to left, top, and right, which basically ends working like this. So I'm always this much from the left and this much from the right. That's how to interpret it. And with this logic, we can also anchor it at the bottom. Okay. So now it's anchored at the bottom of the screen. So that's okay, but in our case, we actually want the player list here to always be the same width as the stats box. Just it looks nicer that way. And if I want to do that with absolute mode, I would have to manually set those widths. And the whole point of UIElements is that you should not have to set manual values everywhere anymore. So we're going to try to do the same anchoring, but with relative mode. Let's unset this. Okay. So let's start with this visual element, which will now become our screen element. I'm going to tell this guy to grow. So flex grow just means take up all available space within your parent, which in our case is the screen. And within this, we will first worry about anchoring in terms of horizontal axes. So let's add one element to be our left side, and another element to be our right side. Okay, so let's switch the orientation here to row direction. So now they are side by side. And we're going to also use justify content space between to kind of get them stuck to the sides of the screen. So we're getting close to what we want. On the left side, we have our toolbar of buttons. So let's do one more element for that. Toolbar. And now we can give our button a home, so the screen can take up all the space. So the button is inside the toolbar, which is inside the left column. And we need to center this. So again, justify content, center. So we have our center button. And because I'm bored, I want to play the game a little bit. I'm going to give this guy a name, and explosion. And now it works. So what happened there was my game code detects that the XML has reloaded, and it starts looking for elements by name, similar to what we had in the code example, if you recall, with the query, uQuery. And if it finds a button with this name, it will use register callback to register for click events and start doing stuff. So as a UI designer, I don't have to really worry about functionality. As long as I name my elements correctly, they will work. And then the rest, the layout and the styling, is completely up to me. So let's continue with that. Let's remove the text and set the background, background color to black. Now, before I move on with this button, I actually want to apply the same styles to all three buttons, obviously. I don't want to duplicate each setting. So let's move the inline styles to the style sheet so we can share them. So for that, I just need to come up with a new class name, toolbar button, and use extract inline styles to new class. So this did a couple of things. It moved all of the overrides that I had inlined to a new rule in the style sheet. So you can see the width and height are still set, but they're not bold, they're not overwritten. And it added a class to my button, so it has now toolbar button. And if we go to the style sheet selector, we see we now have the width and height here. We can also look at the previews for the XML and USS that's being generated. So UI Builder just generates XML and USS, so you can load an XML file you wrote by hand, or you can save this and start modifying it by hand. It's interchangeable. So we can see our button here all the way deep in the hierarchy already, and we can also see our new style rule with the width and height and the, well, I'm leaking position. Let's undo that. There. So using defaults is always better. So that's that. So now we're free to well, duplicate the button, or we can also drag in a new button and drag this class on top of the button to apply the style. And now, if I go and select my rule, I can do something like increase the margin, and of course, it's being applied to all 3 buttons at the same time. Okay, let's fix this up. So let's finish the functionality. We have increase speed and back to menu. Okay, so now they should work. Of course, we don't see much changing, but yeah, I'm definitely getting faster. Yep. This should still cause explosions, and this will get us back to the main menu. Cool. So we have some additional styles. I know that, well, now we're free to change styles. So I know I have a border width, which we can set directly with UIElements. We don't need a picture for this. I can also give it a radius, and of course, set a color. Okay, let's give these guys icons. So this one is the upgrade one. This one is, and last one, back to menu, there we go. Of course, the icons I set inline because, well, they're unique for each button. So inline styles have their place. Okay, so that's looking better. But now we have the problem that we have no feedback at all when I push this button, right? It's like, it is working, but there's no indication. So let's fix that. Toolbar button, we're creating a new style class directly from here. But this time, we're going to use hover state. So this is a separate rule in the USS. You can see here we have a separate rule, but it only applies on elements with this class if your mouse is on top. So because they're both applying, we can just worry about what we want to change when we hover, which will be the border color. So there we go. And if I do toolbar button active, we change the background color, lighter, and now if I click, you'll see it changes background. Okay, now you don't need to have play mode to visualize these states. You can very quickly turn on preview mode in the builder, and now instead of selecting the elements, all the events will be sent to the actual preview UI that's running, so you can interact with them here. Okay, now the last time I had borders this thick and radiuses this high, I was yelled at, so I'm gonna play nice and get the right values. So I know they have to be, they have to look like this. So to remember the numbers, I'm gonna use the debugger. So UIElements has a debugger. If you've used it in the editor, you probably know it's very useful to find out why the UI is usually 0 pixels when it shouldn't be. So I can pick an element. Let's pick the button. I can see all the details here, the styles, where the styles are coming from, which style sheet, some attributes. But what I'm interested in is the actual values. So I can see here I have border width of 2 and radius of 4. Now you can also use the builder to sort of figure out how other UI was made. Like for example, the builder. Obviously, the builder uses UIElements to build itself. Otherwise, that would be a very bad message. So we can see here how this button works. Here's the background image for it, and so forth. OK. So going back to the game and selecting our shared style. Let's fix this up. 2 and 4. OK, I guess that looks better. Yeah, I agree. That looks better. Okay, let's get on with the stats box. So the stats box is super easy because somebody already made it for me. So I'm just going to drag that in. And OK, that was it. you can instantiate XML within XML. So it's, again, like nested prefabs. If I make any changes to this XML, you'll see the changes in the parent one. And of course, it has all the correct names for the labels, so they're bound. So now when I increase my speed, you can actually see a number going up. Okay. Now for the player list, this is made of two elements, right? We have the header and we have the list itself. So let's bundle them together. So I'm just going to create another visual element. Call this player list container. And within this, I'm going to create a label and a list view. Cool. Let's give this label a background color. Change the text size, text color, center it, and change this to players. And change the font. Okay. Now for the list view, let's first give it a height and a width. So now you see the list view is the only one that has a width. The rest of the elements, so the header and the stats box, are set to just take up all horizontal space available. And so I just have to worry about setting the width on the list view, and everything else will adjust and match. Even after I anchor it to the bottom, which we'll be using. So I'm selecting the player list container, the right column, and I'm just going to use, again, space between, but now it's in the vertical orientation. So now it's anchored at the bottom right. Okay, let's finish up the styles. So this one has a background, transparent, similar. I want to replicate that, so there's a border as well. Yep, good enough. And for the list view, let's fill it with some data. So again, I just need to call it the right thing, and we get data. This is actually a virtualized list by default. So, well, list view, the control, is a virtualized, which means that it only creates the elements that you see, and as you're scrolling, it binds the same elements to new data. So even if I had 1,000 players, I would still only create this many visual elements. But the current implementation has a limitation. You have to give it an item height, which is 100 for my cheat sheet. And so now that looks actually respectable. I'm just going to give this a little bit more width. So again, everything's adjusting. And I know I have to do one more thing, which is give these guys some breathing room. So creating a new rule. Gonna drag this to the stats box and the container. And I'm just gonna give these guys some margin. Okay, I think we're pretty close. Let's save that and go and open the player list. So this is the XML that's being used for each item. So it's being cloned multiple times using clone tree. So if I change the icon, I think this one looks better. Yeah, everything updates on all the items. I'm using the built-in tinting support, it's tinting style from UIElements to tint the icons. And I'm just going to change this guy to 100, 100. And you'll notice the little skull icon is moving aside, as you would expect. Okay, save this. So finally, I'm going to go a little off script here and change the menu buttons, because I saw a style I like. So let's open up one of these buttons. Go to the style sheet rule. So we're editing the styles for all the buttons. And I'm just going to remove padding, increase text size, and give it a bigger bottom border. It's like a fake 3D. I just like this. Now you'll notice I'm editing this document, but the loose screen, which is a different XML file, is also changing into styles. This is because they're both using the same USS style sheet, so any changes in one will apply to all. Okay, so I think we're good. Let's go back to main menu. And maximize. Just to see what we've created. So we have slightly better, in my opinion, buttons. In the menu, we have a non-terrible UI, in I think everyone's opinion, which works. Explosions. I can scroll this with my scroll wheel. And if I cause enough, loose screen. So that's the demo. Thank you, Unity. Thank you. A few more slides, if you don't mind. I just want to go over the values that we had before and see how we addressed each one a little bit. So for collaboration, this is where style sheets and UXML come in. And of course, the visual authoring workflow with UI Builder. So now someone that's just designing UI doesn't have to worry about code, and they can work in parallel with the programmer as long as they agree on a contract, right? The names of the elements. Reusability, it's very easy to reuse styles. We're using style sheets, of course, and using UXML templates, so instancing UXML both in code and inside other UXML templates. You can reuse hierarchies as well. Iteration speed, so if you're working on just styles and just the hierarchy itself, you don't need to compile C# anymore. They're just standalone assets. So that saves a bit of time there. You don't have to go into play mode as much because you can operate on the final look and behavior of the UI in an isolated workspace in the builder. And when you go to play mode, you can still see your live changes. So if you do want to, you do need to see it in context, especially right now, if you want to see it with data, with functionality, actually working the UI. You can do so with runtime running and see the updates live. Extensibility, again, because USS, the way it works, you can apply styles on top of other styles very easily. So you can take the standard button and just add a border to it very easily by using the same class. You can create your own custom events that you can send through your UI and register against them in C#. And also in C#, if you want to create something really custom, like a custom control, like the list view that's a virtualized list, you can do that by just extending the visual element. Familiarity. So this is why we went with something very close to a web-like UI framework. We want to leverage all the knowledge out there that already exists for web UIs. We looked at a lot of design software for UIs, and we tried to incorporate familiar workflows in the UI Builder. But we're still operating within Unity, so we're using the same Unity assets, the same Unity workflows, and we were on all the platforms that Unity runs on. Finally, for performance, this is a big one. This is why we went retain mode. So because it's retain mode, we have a lot more room for optimizations. If you're coming from UGUI, you don't have to worry about sub-canvases and canvases and trying to optimize your batches with canvases and atlasing. This is now our responsibility. So you just have to worry about your structure, how it makes sense to lay out your UI, and then we will optimize that to render only what's needed when it's needed. And also we do atlasing ourselves for all the UI images, so you don't have to do atlasing manually. Just going to end with a quick timeline of UIElements. So we released for editor extensions in 2019-1, so this was a public version, production-ready API, but it was only for editor extensions. In 2019 too, we improved performance and we got closer to CSS parity. Now in 2019.3, which is coming pretty soon, we will release the preview package for the runtime, that panel renderer component. So you can start playing with UI at runtime, and also the preview package for the UI builder itself. And finally, during 2020, we plan to release UIElements as a whole for production use, so not preview, so you can start building UI with UIElements. Just gonna make it clear, though, that we're not planning to deprecate or in any way reduce the functionality of ImGUI or UGUI. They will continue to be maintained through this period, just that for future work, we're investing more and more in UIElements. So I actually lied a little bit. UI Builder is available today in the package manager, and it works with 2019.2 and above. So you just have to enable preview packages. You should be able to try it now. You'll just have to wait until 2019.3 to get the runtime part. If you want to know more about the API itself, so that one slide I had, but you want a whole talk about that slide, I recommend watching the last Unite talk on UIElements. It goes into pretty big depth on that. It's also a good comparison if you're coming from ImGUI. It's like half the talk is about ImGUI. And finally, please visit our forum for questions, comments. We're pretty active there. So yeah, thank you. There's lots of time for questions. But thank you. So there's mics in the back if you have questions.
Hi.
Hello. I can't see anything. Oh, there we go. Hey, thank you. Yes?
Well, this looks amazing, so congrats.
Thank you.
Is there any way to add animation to it?
Yeah, so we've got in the C# API, we do have twinning support. So simple twinning, like ease in, ease out, we have a library for that. Right now it's only in the C# API, so it's not been exposed to USS yet. But we're looking at using the same CSS transitions syntax in USS. So that's for simple animations. We're also looking at how we're going to hook up with the standard animation system workflows in Unity itself. So you'll be able to, for more complex things, if you want to use timeline, you'll be able to hook in into the UI and control elements that way, but not in this version.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Is there anything similar to the event system that currently exists, so you can control your interface with a gamepad or stuff like that?
So if I go back to the, so there's an event system. It's actually named the same, which is a little confusing, but this is the event system for UIElements. And it works the same as the event system for UGUI. You hook it up to the input system in Unity, and you can control UI this way too.
Does it have proper support for multiple players? Because that was lacking in the previous UI system.
I'm not certain on that. I would ask in the forum. We'll find the answer for you.
Okay, that would be amazing.
Hi. Hey.
Hey.
First of all, I must say it is amazing work. It's something that we are waiting for years, really, seriously.
That's good to hear.
My question is simple. What is about our biggest pain, like showing particles or 3D objects on top of UI?
Right. So we've, as you can see here, there's no children to this game object. That's because UIElements runs in its own space. And this was a choice we made to really optimize UI and get it as performant as possible. The goal is really one draw call for the entire UI. So with that, of course, comes the question of how to play nice with the rest of the game. So there's going to be two workflows. You'll be able, if you run, okay, so right now this is only supporting screen space UI. But you can imagine here a drop-down enabling screen overlay, so running in front of the camera, or roll space, like health bars floating around. So for that workflow, you'll be able to, well, we're looking at the ability to sort of lock a game object or a particle system on top of an element. So the element is driving the position of that object, but the element itself is still part of the layout system of the rest of the UI. So you sort of get the UI driving the positions of everything, but you are using actual game objects for just an inventory screen scrolling down. The actual inventory items will be game objects or prefabs running in front of the camera. So that's one way. And then the other way is having UIElements sort of panels on top, like being driven by game objects. So a health bar, like that's floating around people. Units, you can have that sort of floating in space, but then within that health bar, you have the full UIElements layouting system, so you can increase font size and do whatever you need, but just in that space. So those are the sort of approach we have. It's now kind of be a hybrid system, if you will, but it should, we want to integrate well with the rest of the scene.
Yeah, that sounds promisable. Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question for dynamic elements like text that change in size, for example, localization for different languages. How would you deal with that when text goes wild? And is there some auto sizing?
Yeah, so actually text is really king in UIElements. It's almost to the point that it's annoying. Of course, this is a fixed size because this button has a width, I think, because the column has a width. As I was changing, this was the example I wanted to use. Right, so as I was changing this text here, you can see the rest of the UI is adjusting to make room for the text. So this is what you get by default with UIElements. If you're talking about Text Mesh Pro features where you want the text to shrink as you get, is that more what? So text right now, we don't have the full feature set of Text Mesh Pro in UIElements. We are using the same core in runtime, but you can see the text controls are just this for now. So over time, we're going to add more features and expose more of the text mesh core to UIElements, and that's where you'll get more control.
Okay, cool. We'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering, is it possible to still use the UI builder if the files for it, so the USS files and the UXML files, are inside the streaming assets folder or in some kind of way that isn't imported directly into the project?
Sorry, can you speak closer to the mic?
Oh, sorry. So my question was, is the UI builder able to work if the files are in something like the streaming assets folder so that they can be edited after the build's been made? So for things like modders and stuff, if they're able to change those files after it's been built?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question. Maybe you can come after and ping me, because I don't want to say the wrong thing. Sorry.
Is it possible to inject geometry into the renderer?
Your own what, sorry?
Your own geometry.
Oh, yes, so we have callback to essentially create your own geometry and just give it to, like by default we generate quads obviously for each element, but we do have an API support for creating custom geometry. So if you think of shader graph or VFX graph, the edges, so first of all, both of those are built using UIElements, and the edges going between the nodes, those are obviously custom geometry that's being built using this API.
That's not the level I'm referring to, though. So say you have a UI that you've built and the system generates a geometry that's then rendered. Can I go and inject my own geometry at runtime on top of that as it's rendering it? Because this is currently possible with canvases.
Probably not right now, but as we develop screen overlay and we embed ourselves using in the universal scriptable pipeline, render pipeline, that will be possible.
Okay.
I heard that
we have actually, sorry, I should have said 9, 10, oh, we're 10 seconds over. I'm reading this wrong. Thank you. I will be here or outside for questions. Thanks.